95 birds, and not one of them looked like a good idea. That was what people kept saying at the farm liquidation outside Ava, Missouri. The Indian runner ducks stood in a nervous line beside a sagging wire pen, tall and thin, their bodies tilted forward like bowling pins about to walk away. The guinea fowl were worse. They paced, flapped, screamed, and threw themselves against the fencing every time a truck door slammed. 60 ducks, 35 guinea fowl, all of them noisy, all of them half wild, all of them left over from a roadside petting farm that had gone broke. Nobody wanted the whole group. A few people asked about taking 2 ducks for their pond. One man offered $5 for a guinea hen, then changed his mind when the bird flew straight over his head and landed on the auctioneer's trailer. Then Mara Bell raised her hand. She was 27 years old, wearing a faded green jacket and mud-stained work boots. She had been back in the Ozarks for less than 4 months, and most people still thought of her as the Bell girl who had gone off to Kansas City and come home after things did not work out. The auctioneer looked at her twice. "You're bidding on all of them?" Mara nodded. "Ducks and guineas?" "All of them." Someone behind her laughed. The final price was $40. Not $40 per bird, $40 for the entire flock. Wade Kessler was leaning against the hood of his truck when Mara signed the receipt. Wade farmed more than 1,400 acres of pasture, hay, corn, and soybeans across 2 counties. He was the kind of man people listened to even when he was wrong, mostly because he had enough land to sound convincing. He watched Mara trying to guide the ducks toward an old livestock trailer while the guinea fowl scattered in every direction. Then he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You didn't buy 95 birds. You bought 95 mouths, and 95 different ways to lose money." The men around him laughed. Mara did not answer. She kept moving slowly behind the ducks, 1 step at a time, until the first one climbed the ramp. 3 summers later, Wade Kessler would drive up the gravel road to Mara's farm, carrying a brand new notebook. But that morning, he was still laughing. And Mara was still trying to get 35 guinea fowl out of a cedar tree. Before we go any farther, think about the last thing someone told you would never work. You do not have to tell anybody yet. Just keep it in mind. Because this story is not really about birds. It is about what happens when 2 things that seem completely wrong turn out to be right for different reasons. Mara had come home to 42 acres outside Gainesville, Missouri, after losing a job she had spent 6 years building her life around. The company called it restructuring. Her landlord called it a rent increase. Her bank called it insufficient funds. By the time she packed her car and drove south, she was tired of people finding professional words for the feeling of being pushed out. The Bell place had belonged to her grandfather, Amos. It sat at the end of a narrow road where the pavement gave up and the hills started making decisions for you. The farm was not large by local standards. It had an old apple orchard on the east slope, 2 acres of strawberries that had mostly gone back to weeds, several rough pastures, a pond, and a network of drainage ditches that filled every spring and cracked hard every August. The house needed a roof. The barn leaned. The fencing had more patches than original wire. But the property was paid for. That mattered. Mara had not come back with a plan. She had come back because the farm was the only place she could go without asking permission. Her grandfather had died 7 years earlier, and the land had sat mostly unused since then. An older neighbor cut the hay once or twice a year. Deer worked the orchard. Raccoons worked everything else. During her second week home, Mara found a stack of field maps in a metal cabinet in the barn. They were not official maps. Amos had drawn them by hand on feed sacks, seed catalogs, and the backs of old calendars. He had marked wet places in blue pencil, dry ridges in red. He had written notes beside fence lines and tree rows. Too wet for tractor in April. Grasshoppers bad after hot June. Slugs under berries after long rain. Leave this edge rough. Move chickens after harvest. Do not fight the hill. Mara read that last line several times. Do not fight the hill. Her grandfather had written it in 3 different places. She did not understand exactly what he meant, but she liked the sound of it. The morning after the auction, she opened the trailer and learned how little control she actually had. The Indian runner ducks came out first. They did not waddle like the heavy pond ducks she remembered from childhood. They moved upright and fast, necks stretched high, feet working underneath them like a crowd of tiny commuters late for a train. They crossed the barnyard in one narrow group, found the lowest muddy spot near the drainage ditch, and started probing the wet ground with their bills. The guinea fowl came out 5 minutes later. They exploded. Half flew onto the barn roof. 6 landed in the apple trees. 1 crossed the road. 3 disappeared into tall grass. The rest stood in the yard yelling at nothing. Mara spent the entire day trying to bring them back. By sunset, she had recovered 31. She found the last 4 the next morning standing on Wade Kessler's hayfield, nearly a mile away. Wade was waiting by the fence. You missing something? Mara looked at the birds. I know where they are now. He smiled. That your business model? She climbed through the fence without answering. For the first month, the birds seemed determined to prove him right. The ducks ate more feed than Mara expected. The guinea fowl refused to sleep where she wanted them to sleep. The ducks panicked if separated from one another. The guineas panicked if they were together, apart, awake, asleep, hungry, full, indoors, or outside. At least that was how it felt. Mara lost 2 guinea fowl to predators in the first 3 weeks. 1 duck injured a leg. A storm tore open part of the temporary enclosure. The strawberry patch still looked terrible. The orchard still looked worse. People in town started asking her how the bird circus was going. She told them it was going. That was all. But Mara had one habit left over from her old job. She wrote things down. At first, she did it because she was trying to control costs. Feed, bedding, fencing, repairs, eggs collected, birds lost, hours spent. Then she started recording where the birds went. The ducks always moved downhill, not sometimes, always. They searched the wet edges of the pond, the drainage ditch, the muddy ground beneath the berry rows, and the shaded soil under the lowest apple trees. The guinea fowl did the opposite. They climbed. They crossed the dry pasture. They worked the fence lines. They moved through the orchard's upper slope and into the tall grass where the ducks would not go. At first, Mara thought the 2 groups were avoiding each other. Then one evening, she opened one of her grandfather's old field maps. The map showed the farm divided into wet zones and dry zones, blue pencil and red pencil. Mara looked through the window. The ducks were in the blue. The guinea fowl were in the red. She sat there for a long time. The next morning, she stopped trying to keep the whole flock together. Instead, she built 2 simple mobile shelters. The first was low, wide, and easy for the ducks to enter. The second had raised roosts for the guinea fowl. She set temporary fencing around the lower strawberry rows and moved the ducks there after the fruit had been picked. Then she gave the guinea fowl access to the dry grass and orchard edge above them. For 4 days, nothing dramatic happened. On the 5th day, Mara noticed something missing. The wet leaves under the berry plants were usually covered with slugs after rain. Now she could barely find any. She checked the untouched rows on the other side of the fence. There were slugs everywhere. She counted them. Then she counted again. In the worked section, she found 6. In the untouched section of the same size, she found 43. That did not prove much. So she waited. The following week, she moved the ducks into another section and left a matching area alone. The same thing happened. Then she began watching the guinea fowl. They moved differently. The ducks worked slowly and close together, bills down, searching every wet inch. The guineas spread out. They walked through the grass with their heads moving constantly, stopping for beetles, ticks, grasshoppers, and anything else small enough to swallow. One afternoon, Mara followed them up the orchard slope. The birds spent almost an hour working beneath a row of old apple trees where insects had damaged the leaves every summer. The ground there was dry. The ducks had never shown any interest in it. Mara checked the trees every week after that. The damage did not disappear, but it slowed. Then she looked at the whole farm differently. The ducks were not bad at covering dry ground. It was simply not their ground. The guinea fowl were not useless in the wet rows. They were just better somewhere else. The flock was not one failed system. It was two incomplete systems that happened to fit together. Mara wrote one sentence across the top of a clean page. They are not doing the same job. That sentence changed everything. She started creating a rotation. The ducks worked the low areas after harvest, during wet weeks, and around the drainage ditches. The guinea fowl followed the dry edges, upper pasture, fence lines, and orchard rows. Neither group stayed in one place too long. Mara kept notes on plant damage, feed use, bird condition, egg production, and insect pressure. She took pictures from the same locations every 7 days. She used stakes and string to mark test areas. One area got ducks. One got guinea fowl. One got both in sequence. One got neither. By late summer, the differences were visible. The sections with both groups had fewer damaged leaves, fewer slugs in the damp areas, and fewer grasshoppers in the dry edges. The birds were also finding more of their own food. Mara's feed bill dropped. Not to zero, not even close, but enough to matter. The first person to take her seriously was not a large farmer. It was a woman named June Merritt, who grew strawberries on 6 acres 10 miles away. June had been fighting slugs all spring. She had tried traps, barriers, hand-picking, and several products she no longer wanted, near fruit her customers ate, straight from the field. She came to Mara's place because she had heard about the strange ducks. Mara walked her through the test rows. June knelt beside the berry plants and turned over leaves. Then she walked to the untouched area. "How many ducks would I need?" "I don't know yet," Mara said. June looked surprised. "Most people selling something did not say that." Mara continued. "I know how many I used here. Your ground is flatter. Your rows hold more water. I'd have to see it." June invited her over the next morning. Mara spent 2 hours walking the farm before she brought a single bird. She looked at the slope. She checked the spacing between rows. She asked when the fruit would be picked. She marked areas the birds should not enter while berries were ripening. Then she proposed a short trial after harvest. 24 ducks for 6 days. Guinea fowl along the dry outer border. June agreed. Wade heard about it by lunchtime. He announced at the feed store that Mara had invented a pest control company that could fly away. People laughed. Mara loaded the birds. The trial was not perfect. The ducks flattened several plants near a water trough. The guinea fowl crossed into a neighbor's pasture twice. Moving the shelters took longer than expected, but at the end of the week, June found far fewer slugs in the worked rows. The dry perimeter also showed less fresh grasshopper damage. June paid Mara $300. It was not a fortune. After fuel, fencing, and labor, it was less impressive than it sounded. But it was the first money the birds had earned by doing the thing everyone said they could not do. Mara drove home with the payment folded inside her grandfather's field map. That fall, she took a second job at a small orchard, then a third. She also sold duck eggs to a bakery in town and guinea keets to two families who wanted small flocks of their own. People began calling her system the bird rotation. Mara hated the name, but it stayed. She never promised to eliminate every pest. She never told anyone they could stop paying attention to their fields. She never claimed birds could replace every other tool. What she said was simpler. Use the ducks where the ground stays wet. Use the guineas where it dries out. Move both before they start doing more damage than good. That sounded too plain to be impressive, which was one reason Wade dismissed it. The other reason was scale. His farm was too large for experiments, he said. Real farms needed predictable systems. Real farms could not depend on animals with moods. Real farms used machines, schedules, chemicals, contracts, and acreage. One afternoon at the feed store, Wade saw Mara buying temporary fencing. He asked how many acres her birds had saved. "I don't know that they saved any." He laughed. "That's honest. They reduced damage in the places where I used them. That sounds smaller." "It is smaller." Wade leaned closer. "A good year can make any bad idea look smart. Wait until you get a hard year." Mara loaded the fencing into her truck. "I'm waiting." The hard year began with rain. It rained through March. It rained through April. The creeks rose. The lower fields stayed wet. Strawberry growers found slugs under nearly every row. Orchard owners saw insects moving earlier than usual. Then the weather changed. By late June, the rain stopped. July came in hot. The hills dried. Grasshoppers moved out of the pastures in numbers people had not seen in years. They hit gardens, young trees, hayfields, and field edges. The wet spring had created one problem. The dry summer created another. Many farms treated the low ground first, then treated the dry ground later. Some had to repeat the work. Costs rose. Damage continued. Wade's operation had thousands of acres to cover. He responded the way he always had. Bigger equipment, more product, longer days, tighter schedules. But his system had been built for one kind of pressure at a time. That year, the pressure came from two directions: wet ground below, dry ground above, slugs in one place, grasshoppers in another. At Mara's farm, the birds did not make the problem vanish. The strawberry plants still showed damage. Some young apple leaves were eaten. A few guinea fowl disappeared into the woods and had to be brought back. One duck became sick and was removed from the flock. Nothing was magical, but the damage stayed manageable. The ducks worked the low rows after each harvest period. The guinea fowl moved through the dry orchard and pasture edges. Mara adjusted the rotation every few days. When the birds stopped finding enough food, she moved them. When the soil became too disturbed, she moved them. When the guineas began wandering too far, she shortened their range. She did not ask one animal to cover the whole farm. She asked each group to do what it naturally did best. The farms that had copied her basic system saw something similar. Not perfect control, not zero loss, but less damage, fewer emergency treatments, lower pressure in the places where the birds had worked. June Merritt brought in a smaller strawberry crop than the year before, but she brought in a crop. Two nearby growers lost nearly half of theirs. At the orchard south of town, young trees inside the rotation kept most of their leaves. Trees outside it were stripped much harder. Then people started comparing fields. That was when the laughter stopped. Not all at once. It faded. The same people who had called the flock useless began asking how many ducks Mara owned. They asked how far guinea fowl traveled. They asked what kind of shelter she used. They asked whether the birds damaged crops. They asked how often she moved them. They asked whether they could hire her next week. By August, trucks began appearing on the gravel road to her farm. Some mornings 3 or 4 were waiting before she finished feeding. Mara did not enjoy it as much as people expected. She had wanted the system to work. She had not wanted her neighbors to suffer first. She also knew she did not have enough birds for everyone. By then, the flock had grown to 82 ducks and 47 guinea fowl. That sounded like a lot, until people wanted them on thousands of acres. Several investors approached her. One man proposed buying 500 ducks immediately. Another wanted to build a breeding facility. A farm supply company asked if she would put her name on a packaged program. Wade's brother-in-law offered her a loan large enough to make her nervous. Mara said no. People told her she was wasting the opportunity. She told them the birds were not machines. A young flock needed time to learn where to shelter, how to move, and how to follow older birds. The land also needed rest. Too many ducks in one wet area could destroy plants and churn the soil into mud. Too many guinea fowl could wander, disturb neighbors, or damage sensitive spaces. The system worked because it was observed and adjusted. Scaling it faster would remove the very thing that made it useful: attention. So Mara made a different choice. She began teaching. She invited 6 local farmers to her place on a Saturday morning. She showed them the mobile shelters. She explained how she divided wet zones from dry zones. She showed them her failures first: the flattened strawberry plants, the muddy patch where she had left ducks too long, the fence the guineas had flown over, the feeding records that proved the birds still required care and supplemental feed. Then she showed them the successful rows. One farmer asked, "So what do I need to buy?" Mara looked at him. "A notebook." That story reached Wade within a day. He arrived at Mara's farm 2 weeks later. Alone. No audience. No jokes. He parked near the barn and stood watching the ducks move through a shallow drainage area. The guinea fowl were spread across the dry slope above them. For once, Wade waited for Mara to speak first. She did not. Finally, he said, "I thought the point was the birds." Mara leaned against the fence. "They're part of it. I bought 30 guinea fowl last month. I heard. They left. I heard that too." Wade looked toward the hill. "I put them where I needed them. Did they want to be there?" "They're birds." Mara waited. Wade rubbed the back of his neck. Then he said, "I kept trying to make one system work everywhere." Mara nodded. Wet ground, dry ground, pasture, orchard, field edge. I treated all of it like it was the same problem. It wasn't. No. The ducks moved farther down the ditch. The guinea fowl crossed between 2 apple trees. Wade watched both groups. Then he said, "Can I buy some from you?" Mara shook her head. His face tightened. She continued, "I'll teach you how to set up your own flock, but I'm not selling you birds until you know where you're putting them." Wade gave a tired laugh. "You telling me I don't know my own land? I'm telling you to look at it again." He stood there quietly. Then Mara pointed toward his truck. "Bring a notebook next time." The next morning, Wade came back carrying one. That detail traveled faster than any story about crop damage. Wade Kessler, who once said Mara had bought 95 ways to lose money, was seen walking her lower field with a notebook open in his hand. To his credit, once he started learning, he took it seriously. He began with a small area, not the entire farm. Mara helped him map the wet zones, dry slopes, drainage edges, and places where birds should never be used. He built proper shelters. He trained young birds near older ones. He moved them slowly. He tracked what happened. The first year, His results were mixed. The second year, they improved. By the third, he had working groups of ducks and guinea fowl moving across selected sections of his farm. He never used them everywhere. That was the lesson. Mara's system did not become a giant company. It became something quieter. 12 farms learned it, then 30, then more. A local cooperative began raising small groups of birds and matching them with farms that had the right conditions. Mara turned her grandfather's maps and her own records into a plain field guide. The first page contained one sentence: "Do not ask one thing to do every job." Over time, the birds became a normal sight in parts of the county. Indian runner ducks moving through wet rows in tight, upright groups. Guinea fowl spreading across dry orchard edges like noisy little patrols. People still complained about the sound. Some things never changed. But the birds were no longer treated like a joke. Years later, Mara stood near the same drainage ditch where she had first watched the ducks gather. A line of young runners moved through the mud below her. On the slope above, guinea fowl searched through the grass. They did not move alike. They did not sound alike. They did not want the same ground. They did not solve the same problem. That was why the system worked. Not because either group could do everything. Because neither one had to. Wade once asked Mara what she thought she had really built. A pest control business? A breeding program? A farming method? She told him she had built none of those things by themselves. She had built a way of paying attention. That may be the part worth remembering. Sometimes we spend years trying to fix people, tools, animals, or ideas because they do not perform well in the place we put them. We call them difficult. We call them impractical. We call them failures. But sometimes the problem is not what they are. Sometimes the problem is where we expected them to work. The ducks chose the wet ground. The guinea fowl chose the hills. Mara's gift was not forcing them into one perfect flock. It was noticing that they had already divided the work. So think again about the thing someone told you would never work. Maybe they were right about where it was. Maybe they were wrong about what it could become. And maybe the answer is not to make it do everything. Maybe the answer is to put it where it can do one thing better than anything else. Share this story with someone who has been judged for not fitting the wrong place. And in the comments, tell me about 2 different people, skills, or ideas that became stronger when you finally stopped trying to make them the same.